The message came in on a quiet Thursday afternoon, right as I was wrapping up a strategy call from my corner office in Tampa. Sweetheart, the engagement gala is strictly family and close circle only. The Donovans are very particular about these things. We think it's best if you don't come this time. We don't want any awkward moments or questions that could make things uncomfortable for everyone. You understand, right, Mom? Dad reacted with a single red heart emoji. No words. Just silent agreement. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, felt that familiar sting in my chest, and typed back one line. Understood. That was it. I'm Holly Ingram, by the way, the older sister they've always kept in the background. The next morning, Patrick Donovan, the man whose family name is on half the major insurance policies in the country, walked into my office with his team for a scheduled partnership meeting. 1 hour later, the entire charity engagement gala was canceled. No explanation given to the guests.
No reschedule.
Just gone. If you've ever been told directly or indirectly that you're not quite good enough to stand next to your own family at their biggest moments, if you've ever been quietly uninvited to protect someone else's image, drop a comment below and tell me I'm not the only one. Share your story, no matter how small it felt at the time. You're not alone in this. Hit that like button if this hits close to home. Subscribe for more real family stories like this one, and turn on notifications because you're definitely going to want to see how this ends. The next morning, I was sitting in my office with Blake Rivera, the only person at the company who knew the full story about my family. We were finalizing the last details for the big meeting with Secure Future Insurance. Spreadsheets, projections, demo scripts, everything had to be perfect. This partnership could take Risk Shield to the next level, integrating our predictive analytics into one of the biggest players in the industry. Blake glanced up from his laptop and noticed I was quieter than usual. He'd seen that look on my face before, the one that meant something personal was weighing on me. You okay? He asked, keeping his voice low and casual like he always did when he sensed I didn't want to dive deep. I shook my head slightly, forcing a neutral expression. Just some family stuff. Let's focus on the pitch. We can't afford any distractions today. He didn't push it. That's why I trusted him. He knew when to let things go and when to step in. Blake had been with me almost from the start, joining as one of the first hires, when Risk Shield was still operating out of a small co-working space. He'd watched it grow into what it was now, and he understood that my personal life stayed separate for a reason. While we waited for the team to arrive, my mind wandered back, despite my efforts to stay focused. Growing up in Oklahoma City had shaped so much of how I saw family dynamics. One particular evening stood out vividly: a large backyard barbecue my parents hosted to celebrate Dad's promotion at work. They invited everyone who mattered in their circle, colleagues, neighbors from the upscale suburb, even some influential families tied to local charities and clubs. Devin was 16 at the time, already showing that natural charisma that made people gravitate toward him. He moved through the crowd effortlessly, shaking hands with the adults, cracking jokes that had them roaring with laughter, and charming the kids his age into hanging on his every word. Guests kept pulling my parents aside to say things like, "Your son is going places, he's got that spark," or "What a bright future he has ahead." Mom and Dad soaked it all in, their faces glowing with pride as they steered conversations back to Devin's accomplishments. His spot on the varsity debate team, the leadership roles he was taking at school, how he was already talking about business internships. I was parked off to the side on a patio chair, my laptop balanced on my knees, tweaking code for a personal project, an early algorithm that analyzed patterns in datasets. It wasn't for school, it was just something that fascinated me, a way to make sense of chaos through logic. Mom spotted me eventually and marched over, grabbing my arm to pull me into the center of a group of her friends from the women's club. "This is my daughter Holly," she announced with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "She's always buried in that computer of hers. Not as social as her brother, but she does well in school, I suppose." The women nodded politely, offering vague compliments like, "That's nice, dear," before turning the conversation right back to Devin, asking about his latest achievements or future plans. It wasn't cruel, not outright, but it was dismissive, a clear signal of where the real pride lay. Over the years, scenes like that repeated in different forms at holiday gatherings, school events, even casual dinners with extended relatives. Devon's strengths in networking and charm were celebrated, endlessly held up as the gold standard. My interest in tech and building systems that solved real problems was treated like a quirky hobby, something that didn't quite fit their vision of success. Dad would chime in with comments about how people's skills are what open doors in the real world, implying that my path was less reliable, less impressive. Mom worried aloud that I might struggle socially, comparing me unfavorably without ever saying it directly. I stopped trying to share my wins after a while. The awards from coding camps, the early acceptance to a top engineering program, they got brief acknowledgments. Then the topic shifted back to Devon. Blake's voice snapped me out of it. He slid the final printed deck across the table, the pages crisp and organized. Here's the updated version with the new ROI slides. You're going to crush this, Holly. Seriously, the best CEO I've ever worked for. The way you see opportunities, no one else does. It's why we're here. His sincerity cut through the lingering fog from my memories. I managed a genuine smile for the first time that morning. Thanks, Blake. That means a lot coming from you. Let's run through the key transitions one more time. We dove back and practicing the handoff between slides, refining how we'd handle potential questions about implementation timelines or data security. Blake played devil's advocate, throwing curveballs like a skeptical executive might, and I countered with clear, confident responses. By the time we wrapped up the rehearsal, I felt grounded again. This was my domain, the company I'd poured everything into, surrounded by people who valued what I brought to the table without needing to compare it to anyone else. Blake checked his watch and stood up. They'll be here soon. Ready? I nodded, smoothing my blouse and taking a deep breath. Absolutely. Let's show them what we've built. I've never told anyone in my family about what I've really built. It started back in college with my senior thesis. I was studying computer science and statistics at a state university in Florida, focusing on how traditional insurance models relied on outdated actuarial tables that couldn't adapt fast enough to real-world variables. Flood patterns were shifting, fraud schemes were getting more sophisticated, and companies were bleeding money because their risk assessments were reactive instead of predictive. Late at night in the library or my cramped dorm room, I began coding the first version of what would become the core algorithm for Risk Shield. It wasn't glamorous, just lines of code pulling in public datasets, weather APIs, claims histories, and running simulations to spot patterns humans missed. By the time I defended my thesis, the prototype was already showing promising results in backtesting. It could flag potential high-loss events weeks earlier than standard methods. After graduation, I didn't jump into a corporate job like most of my classmates. Instead, I cold emailed a handful of small regional insurance firms offering to run a pilot for free in exchange for real data access. Two agreed. Within months, one saw a noticeable drop in unexpected payouts on auto policies. The other reduced fraud losses and home claims by a significant margin. Those early wins gave me the proof I needed. The first real funding round came from a local angel investor who'd heard about the pilots through industry chatter. It wasn't much, just enough to rent a tiny office in Tampa and hire 2 part-time developers. We refined the platform, added machine learning layers that learned from new claims in real time, and started targeting mid-sized carriers. Growth snowballed from there. A Series A led by a venture firm out of Miami brought in more capital, letting us expand the team and build out enterprise-grade security features. Clients multiplied as word spread. Our system didn't just predict risk, it optimized pricing dynamically and suggested preventative measures that saved millions downstream. Each milestone felt like validation, but I kept it all compartmentalized. Board meetings, pitch decks, late-night debugging sessions, those were my world here in Tampa. The company reached a scale where the numbers spoke for themselves. Risk Shield analytics was now solid enough, profitable enough, that I never had to seek approval from anyone to make my own choices in life. The contrast with visits back home hit harder every time. Those rare trips to Oklahoma City, maybe once or twice a year for holidays or a quick weekend, followed the same script. I'd park my understated sedan in the driveway of my parents' comfortable suburban house, dressed in jeans and a simple blouse, nothing flashy. Conversations inevitably circled to Devon, how well he was doing in his career, the impressive circles he moved in, and of course his upcoming engagement to Scarlett Donovan, daughter of one of the most prominent families in insurance. Mom and Dad would beam as they recounted invitations they'd received, the venues being considered for the charity gala, how proud they were of the match. They'd mention Devon's latest promotion or networking win, then turn to me with a gentle sigh and say something like, "We're just glad you're settled and doing all right." They never pressed for details about my work, no questions about projects, no curiosity about the long hours or the travel for conferences. It was as if tech stuff was too vague or uninteresting to pursue. I'd not offer vague answers like "things are steady" and change the subject. Meanwhile, in Tampa, my reality was the penthouse overlooking the bay, floor-to-ceiling windows framing sunsets over the water, a home office where I could work at any hour without explanation. The team looked to me for direction, trusted my vision, celebrated wins together over dinners at waterfront restaurants. Success had bought freedom, the kind where decisions about my time, my future, my everything were mine alone. I kept the two worlds separate because trying to bridge them earlier had only led to disappointment. Attempts to explain my work in simple terms were met with polite but blank stares, followed by quick pivots back to safer topics like Devon's plans. Over time, the effort stopped feeling worth it. They'd formed their picture of who I was, and it didn't include the person who'd built something substantial from nothing. Silence became easier than correction. Let them have their version. I had mine, and it was more than enough. At exactly 10 o'clock, my assistant buzzed through the intercom to let me know the Secure Future Insurance Group had arrived in the main lobby. I stood up, smoothed my tailored blazer, and walked out to greet them personally. It was a habit I'd kept since the early days. Meeting key partners at the door made the welcome feel more genuine. Patrick Donovan strode in first, his presence commanding without effort, the kind of quiet authority that came from decades running a multi-billion-dollar empire. Eileen walked beside him, elegant and composed, in a classic sheath dress offering a warm but measured smile. Scarlett followed, dressed impeccably in designer pieces that whispered old money, her gaze sweeping over the modern lobby with a subtle appraisal before landing on me. Devon brought up the rear, explaining casually that he wanted to observe this major deal for the family's future interests. None of them showed the slightest flicker of recognition. To them, I was just the CEO they'd researched extensively, the innovator behind the platform they hoped would transform their operations. "Mr. Donovan, Mrs. Donovan, welcome to Risk Shield Analytics," I said, extending my hand with a professional smile. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person." Patrick shook my hand firmly, his eyes sharp and assessing. "Ms. Ingram, the pleasure is ours. Your reputation precedes you. We've been impressed by everything we've seen so far." I nodded to the others. "Scarlett, Devon, thank you for coming. Please follow me to the conference room." I led the group through the open-plan floor past clusters of engineers collaborating at whiteboards and analysts deep in data models. The space was designed to feel dynamic, with natural light pouring in from the bay view windows and the quiet hum of focused work. A few team members glanced up curiously but returned to their screens without interruption. In the conference room, Blake and the rest of my core team were already seated, materials neatly arranged. I made quick introductions, our CTO, head of data science, and financial lead, before inviting everyone to take their places around the polished table. Refreshments were offered: coffee, sparkling water, light pastries. Once settled, I launched into the presentation without delay. "We're excited to show you how Risk Shield can integrate seamlessly into Secure Future's existing infrastructure." I began, clicking to the first slide, an overview of current industry challenges in risk prediction. The demo was the heart of it. I walked them through live simulations. One scenario, modeling hurricane exposure along the Gulf Coast, pulling real-time weather feeds and historical claims to forecast potential losses with far greater precision than legacy systems. Another highlighted fraud detection, flagging anomalous patterns in a sample claim stream that traditional rules-based filters would miss. Patrick leaned forward, asking pointed questions about model accuracy under edge cases, data privacy compliance, and scalability across their diverse portfolio lines: life, property, commercial. His follow-ups were insightful, revealing deep industry knowledge. Eileen listened attentively, occasionally nodding or jotting notes. Scarlett observed quietly from her seat, posture, perfect expression, polite, but with that faint air of superiority, as if measuring everything against her own standards. Devin tried to contribute a couple of times, commenting on streamlining customer experience, but his remarks stayed surface level, lacking technical depth. The room stayed focused, the conversation flowing between projected ROI figures, substantial cost savings from reduced payouts, and better pricing and practical implementation roadmaps. My team handled the technical deep dives, flawlessly anticipating concerns about integration timelines and training. By the end of the core presentation, the energy was positive. Patrick was clearly engaged, exchanging glances with his executives that signaled genuine interest. The discussion shifted to next steps: pilot programs, contract specifics, potential rollout phases. Everyone seemed locked in on the business value the revolutionary edge risk shield could provide in a competitive market. For that hour at least, the room belonged entirely to the numbers, the technology, and the future possibilities. As the main presentation wrapped up, and we shifted to more detailed discussions, I casually mentioned being tied up lately with preparations around my brother's upcoming charity engagement gala. Patrick's head snapped up from his notes, his eyes locking onto mine with sudden intensity. The room went completely still. I met his gaze evenly and added, "I'm Devin's older sister." Silence fell like a heavy curtain. Scarlett's face drained of color, her perfectly composed expression cracking for the first time. Devin stammered "sis," the word barely audible, as if he couldn't believe it was coming out of his own mouth. Eileen brought a hand to her lips, eyes wide in unmistakable shock. Patrick was the first to speak, his voice low, but carrying unmistakable weight. "Ms. Ingram, Holly, is it true that your family sent messages asking you not to attend the gala? To avoid any discomfort in front of us?" I didn't answer with words. Instead, I unlocked my phone, opened the message thread, and slid it across the table toward him. He took it, scrolled briefly, and read in silence. The longer he looked, the darker his expression grew, jaw-tightening brows drawing together in clear disapproval. When he finally handed the phone back, his tone was measured but laced with disappointment. "I've spent months studying your work, Holly. Your platform is brilliant, exactly what our industry needs. I admired the mind behind it long before today. To learn that the person I've respected so much professionally has been treated this way by her own family, it's deeply troubling." Scarlett stared at the table, refusing to meet anyone's eyes, her earlier poise replaced by visible discomfort. Devin shifted in his seat, trying to find words. "It wasn't meant to be like that," he muttered, voice trembling. "They just didn't want things to be awkward. We didn't know." His explanation trailed off, weak even to his own ears. The tension spread through the room like smoke. My team exchanged uncertain glances, sensing the shift but not understanding the full context yet. Blake remained composed beside me, but I could feel his quiet support without needing to look. Patrick leaned back, slightly folding his hands. "We came here expecting to partner with a visionary leader. Instead, we're sitting across from someone whose own relatives felt the need to hide her presence to protect our impression of them." Eileen reached out and touched her husband's arm lightly, her face reflecting the same unease. Scarlett finally lifted her head, but only briefly, her cheeks flushed. Devin tried again, desperation creeping in. "Patrick, sir? It's not how it looks. My parents just—" Patrick raised a hand, gently cutting him off without raising his voice. The gesture alone silenced the room further. The air felt thick, every second stretching longer than the last. No one rushed to fill the quiet. The weight of what had just surfaced held everyone in place. I sat calmly, hands resting on the table, letting the moment unfold without adding fuel or defense. This wasn't about retaliation. It was about the truth finally having its space. Patrick's gaze returned to me, searching, as if reassessing everything he thought he knew about the deal, the people involved, and perhaps even his own upcoming family milestone. The professional atmosphere we'd carefully built over the past hour had shattered, replaced by something raw and unavoidable. Patrick remained silent for a long moment after handing back my phone, the weight of what he'd read hanging in the air. Then he straightened, turning to his executives with decisive clarity. "The business value here is undeniable. We move forward with the partnership today." Relief flickered across my team's faces as documents were pulled out, contract terms we'd prepared in advance for this exact scenario. Pens moved quickly across pages, signatures exchanged with efficient professionalism. Handshakes followed, sealing a deal that would integrate Risk Shield deeply into secure futures operations for years to come. Once the formalities concluded, Patrick cleared his throat softly. "Scarlett Devon, could I speak with you privately for a minute?" He gestured toward the far corner of the room away from the table. Eileen rose to join them, her expression calm but resolute. The rest of us stayed seated, the atmosphere thick with unspoken anticipation. I watched from my chair as the four formed a small huddle. Patrick spoke first, voice low enough that only fragments carried something about values, respect, long-term commitments. Devon responded immediately, gestures, animated tone, pleading. He leaned in, explaining, justifying his words, rushing together in obvious distress. Scarlett stood beside him, eyes glistening, occasionally adding quiet interjections. Patrick listened without interruption, arms crossed, face unreadable. When Devon finished, the older man simply shook his head slowly, a gesture heavy with finality. He turned to his daughter, then placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. His voice stayed steady, but even from across the room, I caught the regret threading through it. He spoke of family meaning more than events or appearances, of not wanting her tied to dynamics that dismiss someone as accomplished, as I was, simply to avoid imagined embarrassment. Scarlett's composure cracked fully. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she begged him to reconsider, voice breaking on words about plans already made, guests invited. How long they'd looked forward to this. Devon joined in, desperation rising. He promised things would change, that it was all a misunderstanding, appealing directly to Patrick's sense of fairness. Eileen stepped closer, placing a supportive hand on her husband's arm while addressing Scarlett softly, but firmly, reinforcing that some principles couldn't be compromised no matter the inconvenience. Patrick's stance didn't waver. Regret showed in his tightened jaw, the way he briefly closed his eyes, but his decision held firm. Finally, he pulled out his phone. The call was brief, instructions to the event coordinator handling the charity gala: calm and direct, cancel everything immediately, full refunds to donors, no public explanation needed beyond unforeseen circumstances. Scarlett let out a quiet sob, turning away. Devon looked stunned, as if the ground had shifted beneath him. They gathered their things in silence, avoiding eye contact with everyone else. As they moved toward the door, Scarlett paused briefly near my chair, but no words came. Devon followed, shoulders slumped to feet written across his features. The door clicked shut behind them. I remained seated, outwardly composed, nodding acknowledgement to Patrick as he returned to the table. "Thank you for the partnership decision," I said evenly. "The business merits speak for themselves." He met my eyes with a mixture of respect and lingering frustration, not toward me, but the situation. The meeting wrapped soon after, handshakes exchanged, once more, this time with an undercurrent no one addressed directly. That evening my phone started buzzing nonstop with calls from Mom. I let the first few ring out, watching the screen light up again and again from across the room. When I finally picked up, her voice came through sharp and panicked. "Holly, what on earth happened today? Patrick Donovan just called and canceled everything, the gala, the engagement, all of it. Devon is devastated. How could you let this escalate like that?" I stayed quiet at first, letting her words settle. She went on, tone shifting between accusation and worry. "We're booking the earliest flight to Tampa. Your father and I will be there tomorrow. We need to sort this out as a family." The line went dead before I could respond. True to their word, Mom and Dad arrived at the office the next day unannounced. My assistant buzzed me from the lobby, sounding uncertain. "Your parents are here, Ms. Ingram. They say it's urgent." I had them shown to a private meeting room rather than my office. No need to mix this with work any more than it already was. They walked in, looking travel-worn, faces etched with a mix of anxiety and frustration. Mom's eyes were red-rimmed. Dad carried tension in his tightened shoulders. Mom spoke first, voice trembling. "Holly, how could you do this to your brother? All because of one misunderstanding? You've ruined his future over something so petty." Dad tried a softer approach, reaching out as if to take my hand, but stopping short. "Sweetheart, we're sorry if we hurt your feelings with those messages. We only wanted to avoid any awkwardness for Devon's big day." It wasn't meant to exclude you permanently. He paused, searching my face. We thought you'd understand it was for the family's sake. Devin has worked hard for this connection. Mom jumped in again, anger rising. And now Patrick thinks we're terrible parents hiding our own daughter. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? I listened without interrupting, arms crossed loosely, expression neutral. When they paused for breath, I spoke calmly. You didn't hide me to spare my feelings. You did it to protect your image in front of the Donovans. And when the truth came out, the consequences followed not from me, but from your choices. Dad shifted uncomfortably. We can fix this. Talk to Patrick, explain it was a mistake. You're successful now. They respect you. Use that to smooth things over for Devin. Mom nodded vigorously. Exactly. He's your brother. Family sticks together. I shook my head. I'm done with halfway relationships, where I'm only convenient when it suits you. You've made your priorities clear for years. This is the result. Their protests overlapped promises to change pleas about family unity. But I held firm, repeating that the door for reconciliation on old terms was closed. Eventually, they left, Mom dabbing at fresh tears, Dad muttering about giving me time to cool off. The following day brought Devin and Sloane. My assistant warned me again. Your brother and sister are in the lobby. I met them in the same room. Devin looked like he hadn't slept, eyes puffy, posture defeated. Sloane stood beside him, arms crossed defiantly. Devin started immediately, voice cracking. Sis, please. You have to help me fix this. Scarlett's heartbroken. Her parents won't even take my calls. Everything we planned, it's gone because of one meeting. Tears welled up as he continued. I know the messages were wrong, but it wasn't malicious. Just call Patrick. Tell him it's resolved. Save what's left of my life here. Sloane cut in sharply. You're being selfish, Holly. Blowing up an old slight into something this huge. Devin doesn't deserve to lose everything because you're still holding grudges from years ago. Devin nodded gratefully at her support. She's right. We're family. You can't just let this destroy us. Sloane pressed harder. You're too sensitive about everything. Always have been. This could have stayed small, but you let it explode. They tag-teamed for a while. Devin begging emotionally. Sloane accusing pointedly. Occasionally turning on each other when frustration boiled over, Devin snapping that Sloane wasn't helping her. Retorting that he should have handled things better from the start. I waited until they ran out of steam. This isn't about one set of messages, I said quietly. It's about patterns that go back years. Choices you all made long before today. The outcome now is yours.